Welcome back to another episode of BW People HR Voices. Today's conversation asks the question that doesn't get asked inside HR nearly enough. What if the best preparation for leading people isn't leading people at all? Our guest today has one of the more unconventional paths to the Chief People Officer's chair that you'll come across. Now, before he ever ran HR, he was the Chief of Staff to the CEO, the Chief Transformation Officer, and also at one point the interim COO. Today, he leads the global people function for a company operating across 190 markets. But the lens he brings to that role is shaped as much by strategy on operations as it is by HR itself. Now, joining us today is John Davis, the Chief People Officer at Payoneer. Hi, John. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you feeling?
Feeling great. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for doing it.
So, what do you like most about India since you're visiting?
I love India. I love Indian food.
Yeah,
I love that it's colorful and vibrant and full of spice and life.
What's your favorite Indian dish that you tried in Delhi?
Paneer tikka masala.
You know about the discussion that we're going to have today. I'll start on a lighter note first. You've held multiple roles at this company. You started from operations, you were the interim COO, you were also the Chief of Staff and also the Chief Transformation Officer. Now these are seats that comes in with very different vantage points. Now what is something that you liked about these roles? What is something that you gained from these roles at different points of your career?
First of all, I feel very blessed to be in a company where I can go through such a journey, such a different variety of roles. And I think it speaks also to the fact that we embrace talent density at Payoneer. I think if people are good, skilled, have clear skills, clear value add, then career opportunities will emerge and the company will embrace them and push them forward. I think to your question about the different vantage points and different experiences I had in those different roles, I think being Chief of Staff is hard. You have this eagle's eye view. You don't really have any real authority. You're sort of borrowing authority from the principal that you work with. But you do own really important, meaningful outcomes for the company. And if you do it well, you have the opportunity to make a huge impact. And you're working with, I think, these thoroughbred, brilliant, strong, capable leaders, but a big part of your job is to get them to work well together. So it's a really, really interesting role. I think in transformation, it was more about dot connecting. So we have a very global, very diverse company, different functions that can sometimes get siloed and so on and so forth. And in transformation, it's about leading these cross-functional changes that are strategic and essential to the company. And a lot of your role is rolling up your sleeves, getting in the trenches with people, and bringing them together, to connect the dots for the greater vision, greater good, and get things done. So those are a couple examples. I can go on and talk about it all day if you'd like, but we can move to a different question.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, in HR, all you talk about is people, essentially. It's the center of the conversation. But in operations and on the business side of the company, you talk about different things. Now, what is something that you understood about people sitting in those roles versus what you understand about people today?
I think the thing that makes me a little bit unique as a Chief People Officer is what you pointed out, that I didn't grow up inside of HR. And I have deep respect for the profession. I've sort of fallen madly in love with the discipline. But I didn't grow up in it. I didn't realize that it would be a good fit for me. This wasn't something I thought, my entire life I want to be an HRBP or something like that, or get into comp and ben, or it just sort of happened because the company asked me to take on this role. And I think, looking back on it, there are many ways in which it made sense, where even in my other roles, I took being a good manager very seriously. A lot of what we do in HR is enable managers, help managers be as effective as they can be. A lot of the change that I was involved in at Payoneer as Chief of Staff or as Chief Transformation Officer touched on the people domain, whether it was our location strategy or, as I said, transforming and helping our leadership team coalesce and be effective as one unit, or workforce strategies and things like that we've had to look at, did touch on people. But I think the thing that has really made me unique and effective as a Chief People Officer is the fact that I came from the business.
Right.
And so I think about the people function as just any other business. So we have, targets that we need to hit. We have a P&L that we need to contribute to. We need to allocate resources in the most effective way possible. There's definitely that data-driven metric sort of element to it. I think there's also this element of we have customers. So, I think about who my customer segments are and what are their needs and what is the value proposition that I give them. And I think if I had not come from those roles previously, these kinds of things I would not have been able to bring to the profession. And I think they're really valuable and important inside of HR.
Absolutely. Well, before your corporate career, you've also served as a US Peace Corps volunteer working in the Eastern Caribbean. Now, that's a very different kind of people work, right? It's very resource constrained. It's also very community first. What did that teach you about corporates and your working in corporates? Are there any lessons that you bring in from there?
Definitely. It's amazing. It was really my first sort of professional experience after college, and it continues to impact and shape who I am to this day, most definitely in the role of Chief People Officer. When you go to the Peace Corps, it takes a lot of curiosity to succeed. It takes a lot of empathy. And I loved it. I loved being sort of thrown into this different culture and having to sort of decode how people think, talk, what does it take for me to be accepted. I intentionally chose to live inside the community and not with other Americans and to socialize inside the community. I joined a steel pan band, I taught at the Teachers College, I worked at the public library, and just every opportunity I took to be able to integrate into the community. So it really teaches you the importance of not judging, but assuming positive intent and having empathy towards others. The other thing is, as you mentioned, you're super resource constrained, so you have to have grit and resourcefulness. You're sort of just thrown into the deep end without a lot of, support or resources or really training, frankly. And you have to make do, and that really teaches you to be entrepreneurial. It teaches you to be creative. It teaches you to build things from the ground up, which is something I've taken with me, ever since.
Right.
So those are a couple examples of how it's shaped, and I think those are incredibly valuable in my current role.
Right. So John, you spoke about cultures as well. Well, in a globally distributed workforce, a simple culture cannot be replicated across communities and across countries. There are separate subcultures as well. Now, as the Chief People Officer, how do you manage that? How do you ensure that there's a uniform culture or subcultures are being managed effectively across a globally distributed workforce?
Yeah. It's such a great question, and it's one of the things I love about working at Payoneer is how global we are, how diverse we are, that I have the opportunity to come visit our sites in places like India. It's awesome. I think my approach has been to have deep respect for local autonomy, local decision making, the local culture. I think it would be a big mistake to think that some policy, some approach, some strategy that was cooked up halfway across the world should just be replicated and copied and implemented in some other place. So I think the first thing is to start with deep respect for and things need to be authentically local and created by the local teams, administered by the local teams. Having said that, there needs to be some kind of connective tissue. And so I think what we've done is define principles globally. These are the principles that define Payoneer, and give a lot of autonomy to our local teams to be able to interpret, tailor those principles. And that shows up in everything from compensation practices, benefits, the specific experience inside a given workplace, and so on and so forth. The way we approach wellness and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
All these things get expressed slightly differently in our different offices because of that.
The organizational health, John, it's a phrase that is most talked about in corporates today, right? But it means different things to different leaders. What does it mean to you? And how do you manage that at Payoneer?
Yeah, I actually use a concept called organizational excellence as opposed to organizational health. I think it's part of the value add that the people function needs to bring to a given organization. And it refers to things like, the fitness we have in our structure, how efficient are we being in our structure. It refers to things like our culture and our values, and are those things resonating and impacting and adding value to the way people work at our company. It refers to things like leadership effectiveness and how well are our leaders cascading information, providing the why behind decision making, providing context and things like that for communicating well for people. And our workforce location distribution, all these things go into an organization being excellent as a coherent whole. So I actually think about organizational excellence more than I think about organizational health. I do think for me, an organization is healthy if the culture is healthy. So if you see things like, people are able to disagree in a debate and then commit once a decision is made, and there's solidarity afterwards. So if disagree and commit is happening, I think you've got strong organizational health. If you've got an organization where people are giving direct, candid feedback one to each other, I think that's a strong indicator of organizational health. If you've got an organization where people are not just sort of, pitching their ideas and promoting their successes and advocating for themselves, but are also able to share bad news quickly and admit, failures and mistakes, I think that's a strong sign of organizational health. So, I actually use, when I talk to my board and I talk to my leadership, this concept of organizational excellence, but when you say the word organizational health, those are some concepts that and ideas that come up for me that indicate health.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What about people analytics, John? How does that really, affect your judgment as the chief people officer? How much do you rely on data versus your own human judgment? And what is the real right metric of people using people metrics and people analytics in the right sense?
So I think it's critical to be data driven. I think often we have biases. People have biases. You have agendas, you have pet projects, you have ideas that come naturally to you. And it's really, really important to check the data and leverage data, leverage metrics to make sure that you're making quality decisions. Having said that, I think especially in HR and the people function, there's a lot of nuance. And data is sometimes imperfect. Sometimes we have organizational health metrics. Sometimes we do things like talent mapping where there's a lot of subjective judgment around, criticality or things like that. It's hard to build a perfect engagement metric and a perfect engagement survey. So we need to be careful we're not fooling ourselves with, things that look like, 3.79, precision in data that's actually got, some qualitative inputs behind it. So I do think there's a lot of nuance and a lot of judgment calls that are made inside of HR where you have to balance between being data driven and trusting, your judgment, your values, your principles. And I think if you balance across the both and optimize across both dimensions, you're in a good place. But data is critical inside HR. It gives credibility. It sort of leads the way and shines light. But I think you need to trust your own judgment as well.
Right. In your personal experience, what has been the most challenging part for you as the chief people officer? Which function of HR do you think has been the most challenging for you?
I don't know if there's a function that's been the most challenging. I think total rewards or comp and ben is, first of all, it's fascinating. It's art and science and psychology. It's really an incredibly interesting discipline, and I have a deep respect for those professionals who do that well. But I'm not sure there's a function per se that's been really challenging. I think in general, being inside of HR, it's hard to please everyone. Yeah. You often have to disappoint folks and say no. And I think the profession is actually underappreciated outside of the profession, how challenging it is, and you often have to be the responsible adult who's got the full picture, who knows inputs from different stakeholder perspectives that you can't necessarily always share with other stakeholders and so on and so forth. And I like to be a people pleaser, so it's hard to be the bad guy from time to time. I think for me that's the hardest part about it. I think that says probably more about my own personality than it does say anything about the profession. But in terms of the functions inside, I think they're all interesting in their own way. It's talent acquisition it's the sales of the hunters of HR. I think that's an interesting function where it's a lot about closing the rec. It feels very much like a sales culture, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there to be really strategic about sourcing and strategic about the use of AI in talent acquisition and things like that. Talent development to me is incredibly strategic. It's part of the core value prop that we're offering. It's more valuable and probably more sticky than comp practices. So they're all fascinating to me. I'm not sure that any one is harder than the other.
Well, since you come from the business side of the company, there's usually a conflict between an HR versus somebody from business where money is involved. During periods of restructuring and layoffs, this really becomes conflicting. Now you've seen both areas of this side, and what do you have to say about that? Is this conflict still in your mind, or what do you do as the Chief People Officer during periods of restructuring especially?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really important that the business owns their labor cost budgets. HR is there to integrate everything into a holistic picture and make sure that it makes sense as a whole. Provide guardrails, constraints, guidance based on subject matter expertise and things like that. Provide some process and tools and things like that. And we can debate and argue, but ultimately a decision about compensation for a specific team or funding of development for a specific team is they're business decisions. And I think that's a really key approach that simplifies a lot of these conflicts that could come up, because it's not about HR holding the money and deciding to dole it out or not. It's actually your money. We want to make sure you're using it responsibly and in the most effective way to achieve your goals.
Right.
And so we're here to help. But I think that kind of approach really smooths the way.
Well, we've seen excellent examples of leaders who were CHROs and are now the CEOs, also CFOs who are now the CEOs, COOs who are now the CEOs. According to you, who makes the best CEO? Since you've seen both sides.
I mean, I think being a CEO is a tough job. I think any of these are reasonable pathways in. I do think, if I'm not mistaken, that the data shows there's an increasing amount of CHROs and Chief People Officers who are becoming CEOs, and it makes sense to me because you have this broad overview of the entire business. In Payoneer's case in particular, I think the largest component of our OpEx is labor. So that's one of the reasons why I think this is such a strategic job, being the Chief People Officer, is it's our number one expense, and the engagement, retention, and productivity of our labor is going to be the number one sort of value creating lever that we have. So especially for a company like Payoneer, I think it makes a ton of sense moving from HR into being the CEO. I think it's different. I think each one gives you sort of different angles. Obviously, if you come from being CFO, you've got deep expertise in the P&L, in the budget. If you're a public company, that means you've got strong relationships with investors and analysts and things like, which is incredibly valuable and important. I can see what coming from the business itself, from sales, marketing. I think it depends. From technology, I think any.
So no one answer.
I don't think there is one. I think it depends on the person and the company and what skills the company needs for that next phase, and which candidate has the best fit of skills to that need.
Now, if you had to give a personal advice to an HR professional, would you tell them to learn more in depth about human resources and stick to this side, or would you want them to, expose themselves to different departments of the company and learn more about operations and business and finance? What works best for an employee according to you?
I think if I have to choose, you got to learn the business.
Okay.
Obviously, you need both, right? So you need to learn the profession, learn the function to be able to deliver. But I just think knowing the business is so incredibly valuable. I think, one, it gives you credibility. And it's going to make you effective with the business because you're going to be able to couch whatever advice you're giving in why is it good for your counterpart in the business. I think it's one of the key success factors of any professional inside of HR is to learn how does your company make money, what is the strategy and goals and targets of the function that you happen to be working with, knowing the P&L, I think it's so critical.
I'm going to put you in the spot and do a quick rapid fire with you, and now you have to give me one word answers and you can't say everything.
Can't hedge.
Well, Peace Corps or Fletcher School, which shaped you more as a leader?
I'm going to have to go with Peace Corps. I think, again, the experience really... just one answer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go with, I love Fletcher. I love all you jumbos out there. It gave me great frameworks and great relationships and friendships, but Peace Corps.
All right. Gut instinct or data? When the two disagree, which wins?
At the end of the day, I'm going to trust my instinct.
All right. One HR buzzword you'd retire completely?
I love this question because I think too often inside of HR, we fall in love with some of our own jargon. And, as someone who came from the business inside of HR, sometimes it's incomprehensible. It sounds like gobbledygook. And so that could be things that now I've learned are really important, like skills taxonomy or pay equity or situational leadership.
Right.
These are good concepts, but they're not understood well by the business. And so I would eliminate all of the HR buzzwords and focus on language that the business can comprehend.
All right. Chief of Staff or Chief People Officer, which was the hardest job?
I think being Chief People Officer might be harder. Again, you've got to disappoint people. You're much more exposed. I think they're both hard. I think Chief of Staff, again, it's that leadership without authority. But I would go with Chief People Officer.
All right. A book or idea outside HR that changed how you think about people?
So I've got two books that really shaped, and they're sort of HR adjacent. One is No Rules Rules, the book about the culture at Netflix by Reed Hastings. And I just think what they've achieved there with their culture, the sort of respecting the maturity and the responsibility of employees as adults, as opposed to imposing a lot of rules to make sure people conduct themselves properly, is super inspiring. And the other one is Scaling People by the former COO of Stripe. I think she just lays out there a very structured system with a lot of frameworks for how to take a fast-growing technology company and make sure that it's scaling structured in an efficient way.
Absolutely. Well, one question you wish more HR leaders could ask themselves?
One question I wish HR leaders would ask themselves more. Am I adding value to the business? Who are my customers? What are their needs? What's my value proposition to them? And am I delivering on that? And am I asking for the feedback? Am I asking my customers for feedback on the products that I'm making for them in order to do a better job? I think that's what I would recommend that HR leaders ask themselves more often.
Well, on this note, I'll end the rapid fire round, but I still have a couple of questions for you. Any last piece of advice for young professionals working in HR or any industry actually?
I would say be curious, network, meet a lot of people. Again, I think that curiosity needs to extend well beyond your specific function or profession into other functions, into the other stakeholders that you work with. What are they trying to achieve, what are they working on, what's hard for them, how can you help them achieve what they're trying to achieve, remove frictions for them. And I would say sort of embrace, what opportunities are being presented to you. I certainly didn't plan, my career out.
Yeah.
It's, I've said yes when I felt that my skills were going to add value to a problem that somebody else was having. A need was expressed and I thought I was going to be able to do a good job, whether or not it was like perfectly in my plan or my vision of where I was going to be. And that has really served me. It has served me to learn. It has served me, economically to support my family. So I would say embrace the opportunities even if they aren't what you expected.
Wonderfully put. Well, any tip for young professionals? How do they draft their CV? What really catches an eye of a chief people officer?
I think it's getting harder and harder with AI. I think I would look for, and I think a lot of it has to do with networks and getting good references and referrals and finding out about opportunities early before they really get opened up to a lot of competition. I think there's the standard things of communicating impact in quantitative terms. I think it's really important to understand exactly what is being looked for in the job description by the hiring manager, and really describing the match and making the case for why your skills and experiences make you relevant for this. And I think make it AI ready, right? So that it's going to be noticeable by the agents. As we inside of HR increasingly are going to adopt those tools to help us prioritize, help us filter, help us headhunt, and so on and so forth.
Well, for the next year, what's in store for Payoneer?
So I think we have an exciting year ahead. We have a potential merger with Nuvei if that acquisition goes through all of the regulatory approvals and is approved first by our shareholders. So that's very exciting. We're very, very excited about the opportunity ahead for the merged entity, and we see the two companies as very complementary, so that's very, very exciting. I'm here in India. One of the reasons why I'm here is we see India as a strategic market, both commercially. We've just received initial regulatory approval to operate more, fulsomely in the market in India, which is incredibly exciting. But from my perspective, one of the reasons why India is so incredibly strategic is just the talent pool. And we expect to cross a threshold of 500 employees here in India very soon. I think it'll soon be our second largest employee site after Israel. And as we look to invest in product and in engineering and technology roles in general, India is a natural place for us to expand into and to tap into the talent pool. So that's going to be an important part of the year ahead.
So well, good luck for your next steps, and hope you keep visiting India and keep coming back for more such conversations. What a wonderful and candid time with you. Thank you so much for
Thank you very
your time.
much.
Thank
Great
you.
questions. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.